Then I suggest you suit up, team.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Marvel What If Season 2 Episode 2 video. There were a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references. It's basically the 1980s Avengers. Like, what if the Avengers formed, but in the late 1980s? So the roster is different based on all the people that were active around that period. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes. They'll be doing episodes 1 per day, and obviously I'll be doing videos for everything. So careful for spoilers. If you haven't seen the episode yet, we'll start at the beginning, work our way through shot by shot, talking about Easter eggs and WTF moments. And even though the episode was more about the Avengers forming, but in the 1980s, the actual title was What If Peter Quill Attacked Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which is the tagline for the Avengers in the comics. The whole idea is this is meant to take place in the year 1988, about 6 months after little kid Peter Quill was taken by Yondu during the events of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. He returns to Earth because they're in the middle of Ego the Living Plant's expansion plan during Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Like, it's a bit of an amalgam plot of some of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies with Ego the Living Planet, Peter Quill, and the formation of the Avengers. There are a couple of things that they changed about the way that Ego's plan works during Guardians of the Galaxy 2 for the purposes of this episode. During the episode, they explain he can't do it all simultaneously. He can't activate all the seeds like the Infinity Gauntlet snapping his fingers. He has to send Peter Quill or himself around to each planet one by one, activating the seeds the slow way, going the slow way around, kind of like a reverse Thanos Infinity Gauntlet plan. Perfectly balancing the universe, turning them all into Ego. And when he's coming to Earth, he's already converted the rest of the 9 realms. Like Thor basically explains later in the episode that Asgard, R.I.P., is no more, as are the rest of the 9 realms. Earth is like the last remaining one. During the actual opening scene, though, Peter Quill is flying around the universe in the same type of celestial ship that Ego had during Guardians of the Galaxy 2. He's been sending Peter Quill, like I said, all across the universe, one planet at a time, activating these different seeds. We hear Hayley Atwell's voice as Peggy Carter. She came back to do her voice for the episode. Pretty much all the actors from the movies came back to voice their characters in this episode. I'll point them all out when we get to their parts of the episode. During this period in history, Peggy Carter was busy running S.H.I.E.L.D. with Howard Stark at the Project Pegasus base, which is the same base from the first Avengers movie, just a more evolved version with better technology at that point. We also saw a version of the Pegasus base during the first Captain Marvel movie. It was where they were performing Project Pegasus, which was that whole test ship, them trying to create a faster-than-light spaceship using the Tesseract. So we're seeing a slightly older version of Peggy Carter, but not quite as old as she was during the flashback in the first Ant-Man movie, just before Howard Stark was killed by the Winter Soldier, which obviously goes down differently in this episode. So Howard Stark, still alive in present day in this universe.
Say something. If you don't, you'll regret it.
They explained that in this universe, pretty much everything is the same as it was in the MCU up to this point. So like all the character relationships are the same, everybody knows all the same things that they knew when they knew them inside the MCU. There are a couple quick shots around New York City to show you that it is the 80s, so there's like a lot of 80s culture, 80s designs, 80s haircuts all over the place. The song that plays here is Out of Control by Love Affair, which is from the early 80s. This song is also meant to be a metaphor to Peter Quill's ship literally being out of control. He crashes right in front of Grand Central Station, which is near, like full view of where the Avengers Tower will eventually wind up inside the MCU. But because the Avengers are forming much earlier in the timeline here, we might not get an actual Avengers Tower. Like they might build their Avengers base somewhere completely different eventually. And you probably recognize this location from many, many Marvel movies, particularly the first Avengers movie. Peter Quill also using his celestial powers to lift all the cop cars is very similar to what Magneto did in the original X-Men movie, lifting all the cop cars. Ian McKellen also supposed to be coming back as a version of Magneto, different version, during Deadpool 3 though. We get a real quick blink and you'll miss it cameo of the Watcher, who actually appears on screen in the skyline watching the events in this episode, unlike episode 1. I didn't spot him actually in the episode anywhere. You only get his voiceover, I think, during episode 1. Part of the idea in season 1 as well, too, is that he would slowly become more and more visible with each successive episode. So it might be the same situation in season 2, where each episode you'll see just a little bit more of him until he fully reveals himself to all the other characters by the last couple of episodes. His voiceover at the beginning here sets up Peter Quill's whole turn in the episode. The fact that he still misses his mother, he wants to go home to Missouri where he came from, and he's just lonely. they do the special What If intro scene, and I've already done like a full Easter egg and breakdown for all the different references here. There are many, many of them in my episode 1 video, so I'll post a link for that in the description below, but it's meant to be the exact same intro as episode 1. Then the Watcher explains where this universe diverged in continuity from the main MCU. Basically, instead of raising Peter Quill himself, Yondu ultimately took him to Ego the Living Planet, which he'd been hired to do in the first place. They got into a lot of Yondu's history during Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, so the reason why Yondu got kicked off his original Ravagers team, his original team here is Starhawk's original team, it's meant to be the actual Guardians 3000 team from the comics, like the very first version of the Guardians of the Galaxy team that we saw in the comics. They found out that Yondu had been trafficking in children, so Starhawk kicked him off of his Ravagers team. That was why in present day, everybody kind of hated his guts during Guardians 2. So when you see all those bones of the dead children that Ego had killed on his planet later in the movie, Yondu had been responsible for bringing a lot of those children to him. Part of the idea, though, with Yondu's redemption is that when he eventually gets to Peter Quill, like he's like the next kid that he's hired to bring to Ego the Living Planet, he doesn't want this little kid to get killed like all the others, so that's when he decides to go rogue and raise him as his own. But in this reality in the episode, that never happened. He took him to Ego the Living Planet. He begins to set him on his mission to absorb the universe by activating the celestial seeds planet by planet, and because Peter's much younger at this point in history, it's way easier for Ego to manipulate him psychologically and get him to do all these things.
You won't be needing these anymore, Peter.
Kurt Russell also came back to do the voice of Ego like he did during Guardians 2. He also voices Ego's computer, which is kind of funny because if you didn't realize this, everything on Ego the Living Planet is literally just an extension of his body. So when he makes things like all the technology, that's just other pieces of him. So when he's talking to the computer here, it's kind of like Ego just talking to himself. Like the computer is just a part of Ego, basically.
Why can't I connect with my son?
According to his ship's logs, the vessel was compromised by an enemy combatant.
That's why later in the episode, he refers to them, their army, as we. And if it wasn't clear, even though you're seeing him as a man here, like this is just a form that he takes, it's like a copy of the original version of Ego, the actual Ego is that brain structure at the center of Ego the Living Planet. And it's why at the end of the episode, why Thor makes a reference to actually tracking down Ego's planet and destroying it, because that's how you permakill Ego. Even though Peter Quill vaporized his body here, that was just a copy of Ego that he created. He immediately destroys Peter's Walkman and his mixtape his mother gave him like he did during Guardians 2. This is all meant to be sped up versions of that original plot from the movies. When he tosses him the ball, that's also a reference to Guardians 2. They had a similar scene, and it's meant to be a joke about Peter finally playing catch with his father, which he'd been obsessed about like his entire life. He'd always wanted to have played catch with his father, and now he's doing it. During the next scene, you see Peter Quill walking through the Brooklyn Bridge, blowing stuff up because he's on his way to Coney Island. In the episode later, Bucky also sits on top of the Brooklyn Bridge, or looks out over the Brooklyn Bridge, meant to be a reference to Captain America and him going home. Because during the episode, Bucky also starts to become good, starts his redemption arc, and basically goes rogue on Hydra. If you didn't remember, Steve Rogers and Bucky are both from Brooklyn, so it was like he was going home, essentially. They go back to the S.H.I.E.L.D. Pegasus base from the Captain Marvel of the Avengers movie. I don't think we saw this control room during the Captain Marvel movie, though, but this would have existed during that period. Peggy Carter would have been doing the exact same thing with Howard Stark during the events of the Captain Marvel movie. The whole wave of cosmic radiation consuming planets nearby is a reference to Thor's story later about them converting the rest of the 9 realms, R.I.P. Asgard. Then we see Howard Stark, and it is John Slattery coming back to do the voice of the character. He references young Tony Stark being a pain in the butt. He'd be a little older than Hope, but he's still a young teenager at this point in history, like a couple years younger than we saw him during the Captain America Civil War flashbacks. Peggy Carter also reveals that she knows Tony Stark and has met him before. I guess you'd think of her as being kind of like Aunt Peggy. Listen to what Aunt Peggy tells you to do. And even though they don't really get into it with a lot of the older Howard Stark scenes in the MCU, Howard Stark is meant to be a genius inventor just like Tony. He created Project Pegasus, all the other projects they're working on like the Tesseract faster-than-light ship with Mar-Vell. But he's not nearly as smart as Tony Stark will be eventually. But at this point in history, young Tony Stark is still very much a ne'er-do-well. Then they reveal in this universe, it's Peggy Carter who comes up with the idea to form the Avengers, but it's not till the end of the episode that they come up with the name, like we have to avenge the fallen, so to speak, and play the Avengers theme song. Even though Nick Fury isn't in this episode, he'd still be a junior S.H.I.E.L.D. agent at this point working at the Project Pegasus base. He just hadn't risen through the ranks quite as much yet. And because in this episode, everything changes, like history changes fundamentally at this point, that also probably means that Carol Danvers never became a version of Captain Marvel in the first place. So the whole path to the creation of the original Avengers in the MCU later in the timeline is like completely different now, even though some of the younger characters now might still become versions of their future superhero selves. Like Tony Stark might still wind up becoming a version of Iron Man, just under different circumstances. Howard Stark makes a bunch of 80s references like MTV and We Are the World song. Everyone who was alive during the 80s probably remembers that. He makes a couple Cold War references to set up Bucky and Winter Soldier stuff because the Soviet Union still existed until the early 1990s. Their 1980s Avengers roster starts with Hank Pym Ant-Man, and because this episode is happening in 1988, you have to remember that Janet Van Dyne got lost to the quantum realm in 1987, so she's only been gone for about a year, which is why Hope has not been sent to boarding school yet. This is meant to be his exact same house from all of the Ant-Man movies. Michael Douglas did come back to voice the character again. He also did Hank Pym episodes during season 1. And if the voice of young Hope sounds familiar, it's Madeline McGraw doing the voice. She's the same actress who played young Hope during those flashbacks in the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie. She's meant to be about the same age as Peter Quill. For those of you asking too about Janet Van Dyne in the quantum realm, she didn't meet Kang the Conqueror for several years. Like, she had a full head of gray hair when she met Kang, so he hasn't crashed into the quantum realm yet. They remind you that Hank Pym also hates Howard Stark, blaming him for Janet getting lost into the quantum realm, but they put their differences aside because celestial invasion, world-ending threat and all that. When he tells Hope that he used to work here, it's because he quit S.H.I.E.L.D. right after Janet Van Dyne got lost in the quantum realm. Lawrence Fishburne comes back to do the voice of Bill Foster Goliath, and we actually see him in the Goliath suit in action. It's based on his comic book suit too. Some of you probably recognize this too. They also brought back the live-action King T'Chaka actor from the first Black Panther movie flashbacks to play this version. And really cool side note, really cool meta Easter egg here too. The person who was playing that live-action young King T'Chaka is the real-life son of older King T'Chaka. He's wearing the exact same suit that you saw him wearing during that first Black Panther movie. The flashback scene in that was in the 90s, so he hasn't killed his brother yet at this point in history, Killmonger's father. But because it is 1988, T'Challa has already been born. He was born in the early 80s. He'd be about 7 to 8 years old right now. Shuri wasn't born till the late 90s, so she isn't even close to being born yet. They reference Howard Stark getting the vibranium to make Captain America's shield as a gift from T'Chaka's father when he was still king of Wakanda back during World War II, but losing it in the ice because the end of the first Captain America movie went down the same way. This is also why Peggy Carter recognizes Bucky as the Winter Soldier when he shows up, freaking her and Howard Stark out a little bit, because Howard Stark was there and he met Bucky before he became the Winter Soldier. And part of the idea is that T'Chaka also joins this 80s Avengers team, whereas normally he'd be very isolationist because world-ending threat like Celestial show up on planet Earth causes him to break from his former isolationist ways. That also kind of implies that potentially Wakanda would reveal itself to the world much earlier in the timeline than they did in the MCU, like at the end of the first Black Panther movie. Imagine a version of that happening much sooner in the timeline. Then we see Bucky as full Winter Soldier, like he starts the episode being in full Winter Soldier Hydra mode, but over the course of the episode slowly begins to break his programming, beginning his redemption arc by the end of the episode. Then we meet a younger version of Wendy Lawson, aka Mar-Vell from the first Captain Marvel movie. She's a female version of Mar-Vell from the comics. Her special ship is the Tesseract prototype ship from that first Captain Marvel movie. The entire Pegasus base was created for Project Pegasus, which was them trying to create a faster-than-light ship using the Tesseract, the Space Stone. And it is Annette Bening who came back to do the voice of the character. One of the early differences here, too, is that she fully reveals to them right at the start here that she is an alien Kree. Like, no, I'm not from the US military. Probably one of the best parts of this episode, though, is that all the different Avengers actors here had great chemistry with each other in the episode. Like, they would actually make a really solid Avengers movie if you could somehow pull that off. They go to Coney Island to catch Peter Quill. This is also where the final battle in Spider-Man Homecoming happened. They also reference it during the first Captain America movie. Hank Pym and Bill Foster joke about the 21 feet limit that Bill Foster was able to achieve as Goliath, but now he's way bigger. They also did that during Ant-Man and the Wasp, just arguing about who could grow larger. Hank Pym breaks out his army of ants on Peter Quill, kind of like what he did during Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Mar-Vell's also careful to tell Bucky not to get the Tesseract blown up, like be careful because if it does blow up, it would destroy the entire planet. Then when Bill Foster saves her, they actually play the Avengers theme song. They play it a couple times in the episode too. Then we get Thor joining the fight, knocking Peter Quill out with a lightning blast. It is Chris Hemsworth doing the voice just like in Season 1, like he did all the Thor roles in Season 1. He also did Frog Thor in some cool deleted scenes from the Loki series too. Really hoping they would do like Frog Thor or Alligator Loki during some What If episodes. I don't know if we're going to see them during Season 2 or Season 3. We'll see. They make a David Lee Roth Van Halen reference because it is the 1980s. Peter Quill is a fan of Van Halen. The whole reason why they didn't go for the Point Break joke again is because that movie didn't come out till 1991, so Peter literally has not seen it yet and wouldn't know the reference. When Thor also says that he is Doom, it also made me think of Doctor Doom, just because of all this Fantastic Four stuff that's happening right now, and all these rumors that Doctor Doom is going to be a big character during Avengers Secret Wars and the live-action movies. Thor explains how celestial seeds work to them and why only other celestials can actually get close to touching them, like Peter Quill, Ego the Living Planet, who's like a rogue celestial, or other regular celestials like Arishem the Judge. Always get a lot of questions about this, like Ego the Living Planet seemed like he was different, but he called himself a celestial, and the other celestials during the Eternals movie seemed like they operate a little bit differently, like their technology was a little bit different. So part of the idea is that Ego is fundamentally like the other celestials, like on a DNA kind of level, but he's a rogue celestial, so he's not part of the celestial host, and his abilities just developed in a slightly different way as a result. But if you really think about it, his whole expansion plan is kind of like a perverted version of what the Celestials were doing in the Eternals movie with their celestial seeds, planting them all over the universe, but for very different purpose. Then we get Hope's song and dance montage. She's listening to Never Surrender by Corey Hart on her Walkman, which is just like Peter Quill's Walkman that he lost to Ego. She uses that and the fact that they both lost their mothers to bond with him and then helps him escape. She also winds up being the one to convince the rest of the Avengers to win him over, like, no, we don't need to kill him, we need to help him. Notice here too that they're holding Peter in a cell that's pretty much the Hulk's cell in the first Avengers movie, like they developed it this early point in the timeline and then just later repurposed it for the Hulk. Howard Stark makes another Tony Stark reference when he jokes about being a bad dad, talking about Ego the Living Planet as a bad dad, like, yeah, I hear about being a bad dad all the time for my son. Robert Downey Jr. has made all kinds of jokes about Tony Stark's daddy issues. When Hope calls Ego a space god, the Celestials aren't actual gods, even though he calls himself like a little g god. They're on the level of some gods, like not all gods in the MCU, like people who are actually gods are created equal. For instance, some are crazy powerful, like Odin, who has the Odin Force. Some barely have any power at all. There are also gods out there that haven't unlocked their true potential yet, like Thor begins to unlock his true potential in Thor Ragnarok. Loki unlocks his true god-level potential in Loki Season 2. They also reveal interesting detail that Ego the Living Planet can communicate with Peter psychically across the universe, probably because of Peter's DNA literally being half Ego. T'Chaka Black Panther gives them the idea to turn Peter Quill against Ego and have him take him down using an ancient Wakandan proverb that dates back before the first Black Panther and the union of all their tribes. They actually just announced that they're doing that Black Panther animated series later in 2024 that's going to jump around in the timeline, so we'll probably see other earlier versions of Black Panther. Maybe during that we'll get a chance to see the actual original Black Panther Bashanga. Hank Pym basically wins over Peter Quill by kind of adopting him in the episode, like, please come be part of our actual family with him and Hope. So it sounds like in this timeline, he'll grow up as Hope's brother, or like maybe they'll start a relationship with each other when they get older. Winter Soldier's also able to break his programming after seeing their compassion and hearing Howard Stark's appeals and the memory of Steve Rogers, like all the Captain America name drops. They give the characters a couple cool takedowns and then like a couple new moves that they use for Thor, like him using that concussive blast when he returns the hammer to his hand. Some of the best fights that they did though during Season 1 were at the end with Ultron going up against the other characters in that Thor versus Captain Marvel fight. That was probably one of the best ones. Howard Stark makes a Terminator movie reference when talking about Winter Soldier. That movie came out in 1984, so they'd all probably seen it several times at this point. And when Hank Pym takes Peter to Ego, this whole exchange here where he turns against him basically goes down the same way it did in Guardians 2, just like a sped up version, where he reveals he killed Peter's mother on purpose. But there's one difference here when Peter absorbs the celestial seed. They explain that allows Peter to keep his celestial powers even though he kills this avatar of Ego, but the whole idea is that Peter is supposed to have his celestial powers when Ego's still alive, and the real Ego is still alive in the center of his planet. I think this whole seed idea is just a way to explain how he can give himself a huge power upgrade and keep his powers and be on this 1980s Avengers team working with them, basically for the rest of his life, even after they eventually ultimately kill the real Ego. Sort of like a hack that allows him to keep his powers in the animated universe here. In the live-action MCU, Peter Quill does not have his celestial powers anymore. They celebrate with beers back at Hank Pym's house, and it is weird that T'Chaka didn't know what light beer was. Like, T'Challa and Shuri claimed that he was a super fan of American movies like Back to the Future, so maybe that didn't happen till like a little bit later in his life. You'd think that he'd know about beer though, because ancient Egypt had beer before Wakanda became an actual thing. We see Wendy Lawson giving Goose the cat to Hope and Peter to keep. They don't have any Florkin jokes though. You'd think they would have had a Florkin joke with the tongue coming out. When Peter says he's more of a dog guy, that's just a reference to Cosmo the talking space dog. Bucky goes rogue, escaping Hydra, looking out over the Brooklyn Bridge. Like I said, he's meant to have gone home because he is literally from Brooklyn. They imply that he's going to start his redemption arc much sooner in the timeline, but Steve Rogers is still stuck in the ice right now. There are a couple of jokes between all the characters, like T'Chaka makes a joke about Thor wearing his pajamas or sleeping in his armor. When Thor says 53 gods, I think he's talking about all the other Asgardian gods from the Norse mythology pantheon. There are many, many of them in their pantheon. And Thor basically sets up their Avengers sequel movie with the Avengers officially forming when he says they're planning to track down Ego the Living Planet, kill the real Ego, and avenge those that have fallen. They do their Guardians of the Galaxy slow team walk but play the Avengers theme music, and they show Peter Quill's eyes lighting up with celestial energy, so they're trying to say that he's joining the Avengers team, even though he is a little kid. If you think about it now too, in this reality, because Winter Soldier turned good much sooner in the timeline, that means he probably never wound up killing Howard Stark or Maria, Tony's parents, meaning that if Iron Man grows up completely differently, maybe if he does become Iron Man, the circumstances would have to be completely different. But part of the idea with some of the younger characters like T'Challa, who already exists, like he's been born, he'll eventually take the mantle of Black Panther and become part of this Avengers team in some future roster. Some of the other characters like Hope, for instance, who's with the team, isn't quite old enough to start fighting with them, but at some point she'll eventually start wearing the Wasp costume and being official on the team. One of the only things I don't think is happening though is I think they're trying to say that there'll be no Carol Danvers Captain Marvel in this universe. Like, there's no way that that movie would have gone down the same way if the Avengers existed in the mid-90s, because they're in the 1980s right now. So by the time the Kree wind up showing up many years later, the Avengers would have already had many, many adventures under their belts and been in their prime. The only thing that I didn't spot in the episode they didn't really address is Peter's grandfather is still alive and he still lives in Missouri. Like, he went to visit him at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Like, I'm finally going back to Earth to let my grandfather know that I've been alive this whole time. So if he's back on Earth now, living with Hope and Hank Pym, what happened to his grandfather? Like, did they call him and tell him, like, oh, by the way, I'm back now and I'm alive, but I'm living with this other family now? Let me know in the comments, how do you think they dealt with that plot line? Like, maybe Yondu just killed his grandfather when he came to pick him up initially. There are a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references in the episode. If you spotted any that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. In my full episode 3 video we'll post tomorrow, that's going to be the What If Happy Hogan Saved Christmas, the big Die Hard episode. Should be pretty cool. There's also supposed to be a couple big announcements that Marvel will make later this week. Like, they're supposed to announce who's in that new Fantastic Four movie. Whatever they wind up revealing, of course I'll do a video for it. Everyone click here for that full What If Season 2 Episode 3 video. I'll update the link as soon as I post that. And click here for all my other What If episodes. Thank you so much for watching. Everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.